or description of the elderly, because there's so many physiology changes in addition to being more prone to acquiring illnesses. These are some examples, like in the nervous system, respiratory system, all organ system, all systems in the body, they're undergoing significant changes. So that, and everything here is related to the gut microbiome. Yes. So the process of aging has been demonstrated to have a negative effect on the gut microbiome, the diversity of the gut microbiota, and there are undoubtedly fluctuations in the elderly microbiome, which explains why diet or why nutrition and good nutrition is even more important when you're elderly, especially for elderlies who may not have had the desired or the optimum early life microbiota. You can see here the gut microbiota is connected to the cardiovascular system, the muscular system, the bone, the brain. Okay. Older adults are generally more susceptible to disease, frequently related to malnutrition. They have impairment of the intestinal microbiome functionality and a pro-inflammatory status of the immune system, more likely to induce inflammation. And usually the main cause of immune deficiency is protein calorie malnutrition. So that's why protein is very important. And yes, we have sufficient proteins from the plant-based nutrition, the whole food plant diet. There are many disarrays or physiological changes, but we're talking more about the GI function here. Of course, not just the physiologic, there are other factors like lifestyle, social demographics, living situation, where you're living in a nursing home or you're living in a home, home-assisted living, or comorbidities are also related. In the GI itself, the gastrointestinal tract itself, if you have changes in the brain, you have increased more tendency of being full, lower tendency of being hungry, and you have more frequent instances of dryness to the mouth, and decreased taste and saliva, decreased masticatory function, which is the ability to chew foods, and the gastric acid secretion that much different unless you have malnutrition or unless you have some gastrointestinal dysfunction, digestive issues, and then you have also decreased certain hormones, certain enzymes, and definitely again you have increased pro-inflammatory cytokines, which makes sense why a diet that is low in inflammation or low in inflammatory factors is very important in this time of life. And diversity is decreased, and you have large inter-individual variation. And okay, so generally older adults, they end up having lower protein intake, which is one of the reasons why they're having this malnutrition. But why is the reason why they have lower protein intake? Because they have slower gastric emptying, they have poor oral health and dysphagia, especially when the oral health is not being taken care or it being affected early on in their life, and they have reduced acuity, taste, and smell, so they have less appetite, less chewing efficiency. We know that chewing matters in digestion, the physical chewing here, and the chemical also in the mouth. And because of their illnesses, whether it's acute or chronic, and medications, it reduces their protein intake. They have lower protein level, and they have reduced mobility and social economic factors. So all these contribute to that. And again, the gut-brain axis is still a significant, even more significant in this time of life. You can see here the gut microbiome is important in the release of neurotransmitters from the gut to the brain. Neurotransmitters matters with almost all neurodegenerative diseases and neurologic illnesses, especially even the mood disorders, depression, and all that matters. Okay, comparing healthy brain and healthy aging brain and unhealthy aging brain. So if you have unhealthy aging brain, you're likely to have less neuroplasticity. Again, as I mentioned before, the neuroplasticity is related to your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout the life. It's like your capacity, the capacity of neurons or neural networks in the brain to change the connection and behavior in response to new information, your ability to learn new information, your sensory stimulation, development damage or dysfunction, and unhealthy aging brain, which is related to the gut microbiome, or which means having a dysbiosis gut, is related to lower or decreased lifespan and reduced cognition and increased neurodegeneration. And this, in the nutritional perspective, this is affected by Western diet. Western diet, when you have high consumption of refined processed foods, refined sugar, saturated fat, trans fat and sugars, and low intake of fruits and vegetables, you're going to have altered gut microbiota. And again, as I mentioned, short-chain fatty acid, and you have increased inflammation, and all of which can in turn impact the gut microbiota and gut-brain axis. So most industrialized food containing food additives and advanced glycation end products, which can also alter gut microbiota, increase inflammation, and it can affect the permeability of the gut GI tract. And every time we talk about permeability, we should always remember leaky gut. We talk about the tight junction of the gut lining. The permeability means the leaking, like the nutrients are leaking, and what should not go inside, and going inside, what should not go out and going out. And how about the healthy aging brain? Healthy aging brain is the opposite. When you have diet rich in antioxidants, anti-inflammatories like fruits, nuts, vegetables, you have reduced age-related cognitive decline and the risk of developing various neurodegenerative diseases. And yes, this has been proven in studies, and I will show you later on. You have high consumption of fruits, vegetables, and whole grain, fiber, nuts, legumes, olive oil, flaxseed oil, and low consumption of sugar, saturated fat, processed meats. You have an improved gut microbiota and reduced inflammation and ensure adequate production of hormones, neurotransmitter, and bacteria-derived metabolites like the SDMA. So I cannot stress further how important the healthy eating habit or healthy diet, plant-based nutrition is for the neuroplasticity against the lifespan, improving the lifespan, and improving cognition. Yes, at the age of 90, you can still have relatively good cognition, which means not so impaired cognition, and you want that. You yourself, when you grow older, you don't want to forget all the good memories. You don't want to be remembering all the negative memories. You want to be able to remember your child. You want to be able to interact with them. Studies even show that related to this neuroplasticity, if you have good neuroplasticity, actually the brain itself, even when you're 80 years old, let's say, you can still learn to play violin, and that is how important is the gut-brain axis, how important is the neuroplasticity of the brain. So, in fact, if you are starting to feel a cognitive decline by training yourself, by encouraging yourself to learn new information, to learn things, like to train your brain, by access your brain, it's going to have a therapeutic effect on your brain. Like you may have heard the phrase, you use it or you lose it. It applies for muscles. It also applies to your cognitive function. Okay, so the gut microbiome of older adults, you can see here, is more susceptible to neuroinflammation. The longer exposure to certain stressors, whatever the stressors is, we know it's being affected by various lifestyle factors or even diseases, the more significant the changes. And advanced is increased risk for frailty, leading to microbiota dysfunctionalities, so therefore leading to progression of other metabolic diseases. And this is to compare traditional versus industrialized microbiota. Traditionally, you have low fat, low sugar, high fiber. Industrialized, you have the opposite. And all these show that plant-based nutrition is correlated with high microbial richness and biodiversity, and the the Western diet or the opposite of plant-based nutrition is associated with low microbiome richness and biodiversity, and you have higher risk of acquiring non-communicable diseases. Okay. Again, age-related gut microbiota. This bios is associated with decreased diversity, decreased STF8 producing bacteria, and increased inflammatory signature. This can be affected by medication you use, the sleep time, whether you exercise or not. Sedentary lifestyle is not what we want here, and if you have decreased fiber, vitamins, and nutrients, this all can cause this biosis. And the good news is, okay, we have good news here regarding the older adults, especially residents of long-term care facilities. Microbiota targeted interventions should be made early and often to attenuate or to lower the occurrence of critical conditions like frailty. And if there is any long-term medication exposure here, especially like antibiotic treatments, yes, you can still do something about it. How? It should be followed immediately by microbiota restoration therapy through the plant-based nutrition. And it also helps you to prevent the occurrence of dangerous infections like C. difficile and proliferation of other opportunistic strains. So the more frequent or the longer, again, the longer it's the longer exposure to certain stressors, the more significant is the changes, and then the more seriously you need to take, the more strategies you need to take seriously to intervene so that it can restore the microbiome back to eubiosis or the balanced state. Okay, now many of us are concerned with developing Alzheimer's or even dementia. Alzheimer's is actually the most common form of dementia and may contribute to 67% of cases. And dementia is one of the major causes of disability and dependency among older people worldwide this day. And in Indonesia, it's about 1.2 million by 2016, and by 2030, it will be 2 million, and 2050 with 4 million. So you see, the trend is increasing for even Alzheimer's disease. And so Alzheimer's worldwide itself, about 50 million people with dementia and about 10 million of new cases each year. So it's something that we should not take lightly, and we want to take it seriously. And if there's a question, can plant-based do something about it? Yes. There's in fact, there's a lot of studies showing that lifestyle changes, lifestyle medicine, including especially the nutritional intervention, has significantly prevented and even may reverse the Alzheimer's disease. The studies are ongoing for the reversal, but it has been established for the prevention. And we'll talk more about it. And many scientists are trying to think, how is this Alzheimer developed? What is the pathogenesis, and what happens? There's the increase of pro-inflammatory bacteria. There's a decrease of some anti-inflammatory bacteria, and there is this bias of those patients with Alzheimer's diseases. So they're trying to find what is the connection here, and this is being further studied these days. There are many factors, yes, gene is one factor, but there are also modifiable factors like cerebrovascular diseases, cardiovascular, type 2 diabetes, obesity. It increases your risk further for developing Alzheimer's. Okay, gene is like, you have a gun, for example, gene is like the gene is already the part of the gun, inside the gun, the bullet, but lifestyle is considered as the trigger, something that triggered the bullet itself for the gun to fire. So even if you have risk genetically, it is still possible that you don't develop Alzheimer's. And so for older adults, Alzheimer's disease, there are many factors. Again, saturated fat, cholesterol, trans fat doubles your risk for getting Alzheimer's diseases. And if you're having obesity, you have 40% greater risk for having Alzheimer's. So in short, overall diet profile matters in Alzheimer's disease. And so this is from the PCRM, Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is known to advocate for lifestyle medicine. There are there are 7 reasons why you should keep saturated fat off your plate. Like butter, cheese, meat, chicken, and eggs. I think we're quite over time, but I think we're almost done here. But I just want to go over here. A single meal high in saturated fat has immediate effect on blood vessels. It causes inflammation, oxidative stress, and arterial stiffness, and it can last for up to 6 hours. And studies in diabetes care show that saturated fat increases your risk for non-alcoholic liver disease and diabetes. What else? Women, if you have breast cancer, you are more likely to die early with by consuming saturated fat. And if you don't have breast cancer, you are more likely to have breast cancer if you consume these things: red meat, processed meat, which are the main source of saturated fat. And this saturated fat also increases the abdominal obesity and increases your risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain types of cancer. What else? Diets high in saturated fat increases your risk of cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. And numerous reports show that your risk for diabetes, type 2 diabetes, also increase. And how the opposite? How many people consume low amounts of saturated fat or follow vegetarian or vegan eating pattern? They are the opposite. They may live up to 10 years or longer. So these are certain top heartbreaking saturated fat. So if you can avoid these, that you are one step ahead of those who are still consuming animal-based proteins, one step ahead of all those risks. Okay, we talk about longer life. So we know that why nutrition matters for elderly, because we want our grandparents, we want our parents to live longer, and this has been proven. Plant-based diets have been tied to increased life expectancy, as evidenced by the world's blue zones. I'm sure some of you may have heard of this, blue zones, where populations subsist mostly with plant-based foods rich in phytochemicals and antioxidants, and is associated with a longer life expectancy. So blue zones is like hotspots in parts of the world that have elders who live actually longer, like those in California, specifically in Loma Linda, Costa Rica, Greece, in Japan, Okinawa, in Italy, Sardinia. So elderlies in these cities, they are known to live longer. And not just that, they are known to move naturally. In addition to having wise plant-based nutrition, they are known to have the right outlook in life. They are known to have a good combination of healthy lifestyle medicine. So, what are the plant-based nutrition for adults? The benefits are you have reduced risk of developing metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes overall, about 50%. In your heart disease events is reduced by 40%. Your risk of cerebral vascular disease reduced by 29%. Alzheimer's disease reduced by more than 50%. And risk of cognitive disease like Alzheimer's, I mentioned it already, 50%. And but take note that these people living in the blue zones who live quite longer, not just nutrition, they also exercise, but in terms of nutrition, they retreat from meat. They reduce consumption of meat, and they reduce the intake of dairy. What else? They cut out the sugars, they eliminate eggs or reduce it to a very minimum amount, and they go easy on fish, and some of them actually eliminate the fish. And their snacks consist of nuts. Okay, they drink enough water. They go on whole food plant-based diet, 95% to 100%. So again, is plant-based diet feasible or practical for elderlies? Yes, whole food plant-based diet, but make sure that you consume enough vitamin B12. Because why? Because vitamin B12 absorption is compromised with age. So supplements needed. I will talk more after this, but take note that vitamin D and calcium, you have increased need as your age increase, and because vitamin D is synthesized less efficiently as you grow older, and elderly usually have more time indoors as well, in women. And when it comes to iron, I forgot to write here, iron, women no longer need higher amounts of iron after menopause, more than men. So watch out for those who are taking supplements, because it can lead to toxicity when you're an elderly. So the focus here, whole plant-based diet, is to focus on nutrient-dense diet, where you eat less and you eat more of grains and beans and vegetables. Okay, now B12. This is probably the most favorite questions of many people when it comes to plant-based diet. Okay, vitamin B12. Unfortunately, many people appear to be at risk of vitamin B12 deficiencies. One study found that 40% of children and adults in Latin America had deficient or marginal status, or in other study found that 20% of those over 60 in the US had marginal status. And another reviews found that 40% patient has unexplained low vitamin B12 levels. So researchers contributed this shortfall to food cobalamin malabsorption, meaning that B12, that is the vitamin B12 that is naturally present in foods, is simply not absorbed. But luckily, research has shown that these people are still able to absorb the crystalline form that are found in supplements and B12 fortified foods. But we need to take note that the absorption process of B12 is actually quite complex, and it requires several physiologic elements to take place. Like for example, if you use long-term antacids, or if you have H. pylori infection, if you have alcohol abuse, if you smoke, if you have atopic gastritis, and you have several conditions that slow the movement of food through GIT, like diabetes, diverticula, everything is associated with decreased or vitamin B12 deficiencies. So while people who abstain from eating animal foods can have lower vitamin B12, it's important to take note that vitamin B12 deficiencies are not uncommon in the general population. And so even those who are consuming animal-based food. Okay, so while animal foods contain high amounts of protein-bound B12, we know that animal foods are not ideal source for B12 for at least two main reasons. First, the protein-bound B12 in animal foods can be difficult for some to absorb. So what's the use if you can absorb? And particularly those who don't have appropriate amounts of gastric acid to cleave the protein with the vitamin. And second, animal foods are not the best source because consuming them increase our level of insulin growth factor hormone, which is consistently associated with increased cancer risk and tumor growth, and TMAO, which is a substance that increases your risk of developing arteriosclerotic heart disease. And you also have other unhealthy substances like heme iron and free radicals. So it matters how much you take, at least 2,000 of cyanocobalamin each week, ideally, or 50 mcg daily, and we will talk more about the dosage after this. Okay, you might want to ask why cyanocobalamin, because it is it has better absorption, and then what chewable B12 is better, because if you mix it with saliva, the absorption is also better. And I will give this, all resources is available. I will give it at the end of this lecture. And so there are specific requirements for B12 for specific age, and this is probably one of the most important slides for B12. When you are an infant, you need this much, which you can probably get from a mother if the mother is consuming B12. And what else for adults, for pregnant and breastfeeding women over age 65, you need about 1,000, and if you have deficiency, at least 1,000. And if they are pregnant or breastfeeding, you need this much. Regular adult, you need 50 mcg daily or 2,000 weekly. Okay, so many of you ask, what is the other? Is there another resource for B12? Yes, there is. Which is the same nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast is like a strain of yeast grown on molasses and dried, purchased as yellow flakes if you've tried it before. It's a rich source of vitamin B and available also has fortified vitamin B, but the daily value actually varies between brands, and it tastes quite good. But one thing you have to take note is that nutritional yeast is not for everyone. For example, those with autoimmune diseases, nutritional yeast is a no-no. Okay, so the best way to ensure you have sufficient vitamin B12 is through supplements. And so think about it. Vegan whole food plant-based diet, you just need to ensure that you have enough supplements, and your risk for acquiring other chronic diseases are eliminated. What loss do you have? Nothing. Okay, some other sources of vitamin A. I will also give this resource at the end. This is available, the resource that I will share with you. So this is some sources of good vitamin A and vitamin C. Here, some good resources. And then what else? Calcium. Take note of the recommended daily allowance. And what I want you to take note about calcium is that, for example, here you have some great sources from beans or legumes, but you need to take note that spinach is high in oxalates. It's bayam in Indonesia. Yes, it is high in calcium, but it's also high in oxalate. And so if you eat it raw, okay, if you eat too much of it, if you eat it raw, it can bind, the oxalate can bind the calcium and prevent it from being absorbed. So that's why certain foods, even if you're vegan, whole food, plant-based diet, certain foods are better consumed cooked. For example, like spinach, because you get more nutrients with spinach when it's cooked, such as vitamins or beta-carotenes, antioxidants. So it's more abundant when you cook the spinach. And here's also an example. This is just to show you, compared to the milk, many people think we should drink milk. No. Compared to milk, there are many other vegetables that have much higher absorption for calcium. So you don't really need to take cow's milk to get calcium. What else? Iron. Iron, take note of the RDA here. Vegetarians consume much more iron than non-vegetarians. Hemoglobin levels are similar. There are two types of iron, the heme, the animals, and non-heme, which come from plants. So this is very important. Okay, it's commonly thought that those who eat plant-based diets are more prone to iron deficiency. It's not true. It turns out that they are no more likely to suffer from iron deficiency anemia than anybody else. This is because maybe not only do those eating meat-free diets or plant-based diet, they get more fiber, magnesiums, vitamins, and they also get more iron. But the iron found in plants is non-heme iron. So those eating meat-free diets, they don't get any of the heme iron from the animals. And this is important because this heme iron is a key element of getting metabolic syndrome and also heart disease. So vegans also have lower level of ferritin, which is a storage form of iron. Ferritin, storage form of iron, and studies have shown that higher ferritin is linked to higher risk of type 2 diabetes. And so you see here,